My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 38 years old. The morning my boyfriend said her name in a voice I hadn't heard in over a year, I didn't confront him. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't even move. I just stood there in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug that had already gone cold, and listened. It was a Tuesday, October, 8:47 in the morning. He was in the hallway, just out of sight, close enough that I could hear every word, every shift in his tone. And then he laughed. Not the casual kind, not the polite kind he used with coworkers or acquaintances. This was different, soft, private, intimate. The kind of laugh you don't use unless the person on the other end of the line matters. The kind he hadn't used with me in a long time. Then he said her name, Emily. Not casually, not like someone referencing the past. There was a pause before it, like the name carried weight, like it meant something more than it should have. Emily. His ex-girlfriend. The one he told me was completely out of his life. The one he insisted was ancient history. I stood there, completely still, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to fully see before. Then I took a slow breath, poured my coffee, and sat down at the table. I opened my laptop, and I started my workday. I didn't say a single word. That was the beginning. Up until that morning, if you had asked me about my relationship with Daniel, I would have said we were solid. Not perfect. I'm not naive enough to believe in perfect. But solid in the ways that matter. We met when I was 32. He was 35. We moved in together after a year. By year 3, we had built something that felt real. Routine. Shared space. Quiet understanding. We talked about marriage. Not urgently, not impulsively, but seriously enough that it lived somewhere in our future. We didn't have kids. There was always a reason to wait. Career timing. Financial planning. Let's just get through this year first. At the time, those reasons felt practical. Looking back, I'm not sure they were only practical. The first 4 years were good. Genuinely good. We traveled. We built habits. We had the kind of inside jokes that only exist when two people really know each other. He made me laugh. I grounded him. That's what we used to say. That we balanced each other. And maybe we did, until we didn't. Year 5. Something changed. Not suddenly. Not in a way you could point to and say, that's it, that's the moment. It was gradual, like the temperature shifting just enough that one day you realize the season has already changed. He started working later, traveling more. His phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, started living face down. Conversations about his day became shorter, edited, carefully simplified. He was there, physically, but mentally, somewhere else. I noticed. Of course I noticed, but I didn't say anything. Not yet, because I wasn't certain. And I've never been someone who acts on feelings alone. I act on patterns, on proof, on things that can't be explained away. Emily reappeared in small ways at first, a passing mention. She reached out. We caught up. It was nothing. He said it all so easily, so casually, that if I had been anyone else, I might have believed him. But there was something about the way he said her name, even then. A subtle shift in tone, a familiarity that hadn't fully faded. I didn't challenge it. I stored it. I watched. I waited. That Tuesday morning gave me something I didn't have before. Certainty. Not proof, but certainty. And those two things are not the same. That evening, I tested the surface. Lightly. Carefully. You seem happy today, I said while we were eating dinner. He looked up just for a second. Work's been good, he said. I nodded. Still talking to Emily? He didn't hesitate. Sometimes, he said. Just catching up. Nothing serious. Nothing serious? He said it like it was already rehearsed, like the words had been prepared in advance. I smiled slightly. I'm glad you have closure, I said. He relaxed at that. Actually relaxed. I do, he said. It's nice, no weird tension anymore. No weird tension. I repeated that in my head. Then I nodded again. That's good, I said. We finished dinner. We cleaned up. We went to bed. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the laugh, the hallway, the way he said her name, the ease of his answers, the way every sentence felt structured, careful, like he wasn't lying outright, but he also wasn't telling the truth. And I thought about something else, something I had seen before, in other relationships, friends, family, the pattern. If you confront too early, if you bring feelings without proof, the conversation changes. It's no longer about what they did. It becomes about you, your insecurity, your imagination, your issues. I had seen that play out more than once, and I wasn't going to let that happen to me. Not this time. So I made a decision, quietly, completely. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. Not until I had something that couldn't be twisted. something that couldn't be reframed, something that would hold, no matter how he tried to explain it away. I turned my head slightly, looking at him asleep beside me. Peaceful, unbothered, living inside a version of reality he thought he controlled. I studied his face for a long moment. Then I closed my eyes. And somewhere between one breath and the next, I stopped being the woman he thought I was. The next morning, I created a folder. Not hidden, just mine. On a laptop he didn't know I still used. I labeled it Research. And inside it, I started building something. Date by date, detail by detail, quietly, carefully, patiently, because this wasn't about catching him in a lie. This was about understanding the truth. And once I had it, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. Month 1 started with silence. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind people notice and ask about. I still made coffee in the morning, still answered emails from the dining table when I worked from home, still asked whether he wanted Thai or Italian when neither of us felt like cooking, still kissed him goodbye when he left early and mumbled something about meetings. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside me, everything had. I was no longer moving through our life as his girlfriend. I was moving through it as a witness. I'm a project manager for a logistics company. Organization is not just a skill I use at work. It's how I survive uncertainty. I build timelines. I track dependencies. I document risk before risk becomes failure. So I used what I knew. I opened the folder on my laptop every night after he fell asleep, or when he stepped into the shower, or when he texted from the other room, pretending to scroll through sports scores. I built a timeline. Dates he came home late. Nights he said he was exhausted but carried a strange brightness under his skin. Moments when his phone lit up and he angled it away without thinking. The specific timestamps of messages I could catch from across the couch without ever touching his phone. I wrote everything down. Date, time, exact wording. No guesses, no dramatic interpretation, just facts. Because facts don't tremble when someone tells you you're imagining things. The first thing I noticed was rhythm. He wasn't reckless. That would have been easier. He was disciplined in the way people are disciplined when they believe they are smarter than the person they're deceiving. He didn't message her constantly. He messaged her in clusters. Early morning, mid-afternoon, late at night after I was supposed to be asleep. He didn't disappear for whole weekends. He created narrow absences. An hour here, 2 hours there. Delays padded with just enough explanation to sound boring. Traffic, a client dinner, a friend going through something. The details changed. The structure didn't. One Friday in November, he told me he had to stay late because a vendor presentation had gone sideways and his team needed him to help clean it up. He came home just after 10, smelling like cedar cologne that wasn't his, and something sweeter underneath it. Not perfume exactly. Lotion, maybe. Shampoo. Something feminine and familiar and close enough to skin that it made my throat tighten. He set his keys down and loosened his tie. Long night, he said. I looked up from the book in my lap. Everything okay? He exhaled, like the question itself was another burden he had to carry. Yeah, just messy. Then he leaned down and kissed my forehead. That almost made me angry. Not the lie. The tenderness attached to it. The assumption that softness could blur what dishonesty was. I smiled anyway. I'm sorry, I said. You want me to heat something up? He shook his head. Already ate. Of course he had. I waited until he was asleep, then opened the folder and typed every detail I could remember. The time he arrived, the smell on his shirt, the exact phrasing, already ate. The next week I tested him again. Small, casual, controlled. We were cleaning up after dinner when I said, "Do you ever regret being back in touch with Emily?" He dried his hands and looked at me with practiced confusion. Regret? I don't know, I said with a shrug. Sometimes reopening old connections gets complicated. He gave a soft laugh. You're overthinking it. Maybe, but there it was. That tiny shift. Not reassurance. Not warmth. Correction. I leaned against the counter. I'm not saying it is, I'm just asking. He set the dish towel down and turned to face me more fully, the way people do when they want to look open while steering the conversation somewhere useful to them. Rachel, she's my ex, not some active temptation. We dated years ago. We're adults. We can talk without it meaning something. His tone was calm, reasonable, almost generous. The kind of tone designed to make your suspicion look childish just by existing next to it. I nodded once. Fair enough. He stepped closer and touched my arm. I need you to trust me. There was something almost elegant about that line. Not because it was sincere, because it was useful. It placed responsibility back onto me so neatly that, if I had been less awake, I might have thanked him for it. Instead, I said, I do. Then I wrote that down too. Month 2, the story got more polished. That was when he started accusing me without accusing me. A soft pivot, a subtle repositioning. He never said, "You're paranoid." He said things like, "You've seemed tense lately," or "I feel like sometimes you're reading into things." Or my personal favorite, delivered over coffee on a Sunday morning while he stood barefoot in our kitchen acting like he was worried about me. "I don't want old baggage making you suspicious of something harmless." Old baggage. He knew exactly what that meant. My father cheated on my mother when I was 16. Quietly, competently. The kind of affair that lived in hotel receipts and unexplained optimism and a new shirt bought for no reason. Daniel knew that story. He knew how much damage it had done. He also knew I hated being reduced to it. So when he said old baggage, he wasn't stumbling into a sensitive area. He was stepping on it deliberately. I looked at him over the rim of my mug and asked, "Do I seem suspicious?" He immediately softened. "No, babe, not like that. I just mean, I know history can color things." History can color things. I almost admired the phrasing. I smiled a little and lowered my eyes, the way someone does when they're trying to seem chastened. "Maybe," I said. He came around the island and kissed the top of my head. That night I added a new section to the folder. Manipulation patterns. Date. Exact wording. Context. Because once you name a pattern, it gets harder for it to work on you. By the middle of month 2, I had enough to know there was an emotional affair at minimum. Enough late-night contact. Enough defensive language. Enough energy being spent on managing me rather than reassuring me. But emotional affairs live in gray spaces if you don't have more. And gray spaces are where liars thrive. So I kept going. I checked our shared credit card statements more carefully. Not obsessively, systematically. There was a charge in late November at a boutique hotel across town. Not a full stay. Lounge and valet. He had told me that night he was meeting an old college friend who was passing through for one drink before heading to the airport. The amount was too high for one drink. Not impossible. Just wrong enough. I noted it. 3 days later, I found Emily's social media account. Public but curated. Nothing obvious. No couple photos. No dramatic captions. But she had posted a city skyline from a rooftop bar the same night as the hotel charge. Same side of town. Same weather. Same distinctive lighting from the holiday installation the city had put up that week. Not proof, but not nothing. I took screenshots, added them to the folder. Then came December. And with December came counseling. Ironically, it was his idea. One Thursday night, he came home quieter than usual. Not guilty quieter, strategic quieter. We were sitting in the living room, the Christmas lights from the neighbor's balcony flickering across our windows, when he muted the television and said, "I think we should talk to someone." I turned my head slowly. "About what?" "Us." He said it with sorrow already built into his expression. Not raw sorrow, arranged sorrow. "I feel distance from you," he said. "Like you're here, but not really here, and I don't know how to fix it by myself." For a second, I actually felt something close to disbelief. Not because counseling was a bad idea, because of the nerve it took to suggest healing while he was creating the injury. I kept my face neutral. "What are you asking for?" "Couples counseling," he said. "Before things get worse." Before things get worse. As if they were simply happening to us. As if this was weather. I let a small silence sit between us. Then I nodded. "Okay." He blinked. Just once. A tiny flicker of surprise. I think he expected resistance. Or maybe tears. Maybe a fight he could later point to as evidence that I was unstable, difficult, emotionally unavailable. What I gave him instead was agreement. And I watched him recalibrate in real time. We found a counselor within a week. Dr. Palmer. Warm voice, neutral office, soft lamps, bookshelves curated to make vulnerability feel safe. We went 4 times. By the second session, I understood exactly what Daniel was doing. He wasn't confessing. He was preloading the narrative. He talked about how much he loved me, how worried he was, how lately I seemed guarded, how sometimes he felt like I was reacting to things he didn't understand. He mentioned my family history gently, carefully, like he hated to bring it up, but believed honesty mattered. He said he worried I saw abandonment before it existed. It was skillful. That's what made it so hard to sit through. He never raised his voice, never insulted me, never said anything dramatic enough to make him look cruel. He simply kept laying bricks. A picture of me as a woman quietly damaged by old betrayal. A picture of himself as a patient man trying to love me through it. In the 3rd session, Dr. Palmer asked what I felt was missing between us. "Trust," I said. The room went still in that small, careful way therapy rooms do, when a word lands harder than expected. Dr. Palmer nodded. "Can you say more about that?" I folded my hands in my lap. I think, I said slowly, that sometimes the problem in a relationship isn't conflict. It's when one person knows more than they're willing to admit, and the other person can feel it, but can't prove it. Daniel looked at me, not startled, alert. Dr. Palmer turned to him. How does that feel to hear? He let out a breath and lowered his eyes, like this was painful for him too. It makes me sad, he said, because I feel like no matter what I do, I'm paying for something I didn't do. There it was, clean, smooth, devastatingly practiced. I looked at him across that room and felt something cold settle deeper in me. Not heartbreak. Not then. Recognition. On the drive home, he put his hand on my knee at a red light. I'm glad we're doing this, he said softly. I looked out the windshield. Me too. And that night I documented the session word for word. Because now the file wasn't just about infidelity. It was about construction. The story he was building around me while standing on top of the truth. Near the end of month 2, I got my first real break. Not from spying, from listening. A friend of mine, Claire, worked in HR consulting. Not at Daniel's company, but near enough to understand how these things moved inside offices when personal boundaries blurred into professional ones. Over dinner, I asked her something hypothetical. If a man reconnects with an ex who's tied to his work somehow, I said, and there's favoritism or conflict involved, what does that become? Claire didn't laugh. She set down her fork and answered seriously. Potential liability, she said, depends on the structure. But if there's influence, access, overlap, expense misuse, any kind of hidden relationship where business decisions are involved, that can get ugly fast. I kept my voice even. What matters most? Documentation, she said immediately. Always documentation. I went home that night and opened the folder again. What I had was still incomplete, but it was becoming something larger than private betrayal, something with edges, something that could cut. And for the first time since that October morning in the kitchen, I felt the shape of what might actually happen when the truth finally surfaced. Not an argument, not a confession, a collapse. I just didn't know yet how wide it would spread. Month 3 was when it stopped being personal. Not emotionally. Emotionally, it had been personal from the beginning. But structurally, it changed. Up until then, I had been documenting a relationship, a pattern between two people. Now I started seeing the framework around it, the system it was living inside. And systems have consequences. It started with something small, a calendar inconsistency. Daniel told me he had a late client strategy session on a Thursday, said it might run until 9, maybe later if things got complicated. He texted me at 8:12. Still here, running behind. At 9:37. Wrapping up, don't wait up. At 10:11. On my way. He walked in at 10:48. Tired. Loosened tie. Same performance. I didn't question him. I never questioned him anymore. But that night, after he fell asleep, I checked something I hadn't needed to check before. His company's public calendar. Not internal. Public-facing. Webinars, announcements, client-facing events. There had been a strategy session that day. It ended at 6 p.m. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I opened the folder and added a new column to the timeline. Verifiable contradictions. Date. Claim. External confirmation. Discrepancy. Because once you have one confirmed inconsistency, you stop wondering if you're wrong. You start mapping how deep it goes. That weekend, I pushed further. Not recklessly. Carefully. I searched Emily again. This time not just her social media. Professional listings. Archived mentions. Anything tied to her name that connected to Daniel's world. And that's when I saw it. She wasn't just an ex who reached out. She had recently started working with a consulting firm that partnered with Daniel's company on mid-level projects. Not directly on his team, but close enough. Close enough to be in the same orbit. Close enough for overlap. Close enough for access. I leaned back in my chair, letting that settle. Because that changed things. This wasn't just personal history resurfacing. This was proximity, opportunity, and possibly advantage. I called Claire again. Kept it hypothetical. Always hypothetical. If two people who used to date end up working in connected companies, I said, pacing slowly across my apartment while Daniel was in the shower, and one of them has influence over project decisions, what does that look like? Claire didn't hesitate. Conflict of interest, she said, at minimum. And if there are personal meetings involved, a pause. Then it gets worse, she said, because now you're mixing personal incentive with professional judgment. That can affect contracts, vendor choices, budget allocations. I stopped walking. And companies care about that? Companies care about anything that can cost them money or create legal exposure, she said. So yes. I thanked her, hung up. Stood there for a while listening to the water run in the bathroom and realized something important. What Daniel was doing wasn't just betrayal. It was risk, and risk leaves traces. Month 4, I stopped looking for signs and started looking for patterns inside systems. Expenses. That was the first real opening. We didn't share everything financially, but we had one joint account for household expenses: rent, utilities, occasional dinners, things that made sense, and sometimes things that didn't. I went back through 3 months of statements, slowly, line by line. Most of it was normal, predictable. Then I saw it. A series of charges tied to the same vendor group. Not labeled as hotels. Not directly, but connected. Event services, client entertainment, hospitality group billing. Different names, same parent company. The dates matched nights he worked late. The amounts were inconsistent. Too high for simple meals, too structured to be random. I created a new section in the folder, financial patterns. Then I cross-referenced them with everything else I had. Texts, excuses, Emily's posts, the contradictions. And for the first time, I saw overlap. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to draw a line. That should have been the moment I broke. For most people, I think it would be. The moment suspicion becomes structure. The moment doubt becomes something you can point to. But I didn't break. I got quieter, more focused. Because now, I wasn't trying to understand. I was building. Around that time, Daniel suggested we increase our counseling sessions. Just for a few weeks, he said. I think we're making progress. Progress. I almost smiled. We went twice a week for a short stretch. And something interesting happened. The more evidence I gathered, the calmer I became in those rooms. Because I wasn't there to be understood anymore. I was there to observe, to record, to watch how far he would go. In one session, Dr. Palmer asked him what he needed from me. Consistency, he said. Emotional stability. I need to know that I'm not going to be questioned every time I talk about my day. I tilted my head slightly. Do I question you every time? I asked. He exhaled like this was hard. Not directly, but it's in the way you look at me sometimes. The way you look at me. I nodded slowly. I'll work on that. And I meant it. Not because he deserved it, but because neutrality made everything clearer. That night I wrote down every word again. Because now there was a pattern across contexts. Home, therapy, daily conversation. The same narrative. Repeated, refined, strengthened. A version of reality where I was the problem, and he was patient enough to endure me. By the middle of month 4, I had something close to confirmation. Not a confession. Not a message I could screenshot and hold up. But something better. Alignment. Dates. Locations. Financial traces. Behavioral consistency. External contradictions. All pointing in the same direction. And once everything points in the same direction, you don't need a confession. You need a decision. The decision didn't come all at once. It unfolded, quietly, in layers. First, I spoke to a lawyer. Not dramatically. Not urgently. I scheduled a consultation under the pretense of just understanding my options. I brought nothing with me. Just questions. What happens if 2 unmarried partners separate after years of shared assets? What matters? What doesn't? How do you prepare before something becomes public? The lawyer answered everything calmly, methodically. Like this was routine. Like people did this all the time. And maybe they did. But sitting there, listening to him outline the clean, structured end of something that had once felt permanent, I realized how far I had already gone. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. The next step was timing. That part took longer. Because timing is the difference between impact and noise. I started paying attention to his energy again. Not emotionally. Strategically. He was different. Lighter. More careful with me in a way that felt temporary. Like someone protecting a version of reality that was about to change. One night I asked casually, "Work going well?" He smiled. Yeah. There was something behind that smile. Something contained. I leaned against the counter. Anything specific? He hesitated. Just slightly. Maybe, he said. There's talk about some internal restructuring. Nothing official. Internal restructuring. I nodded. Sounds good. He stepped closer, kissed my cheek. I don't want to say too much yet. Of course he didn't. Secrets have timelines. And whatever was coming, he was waiting for it. I opened the folder that night and created a new section. Event trigger. Because if there was going to be a moment, a specific point where his life shifted forward, that was the moment everything else needed to land. Not before. Not after. Exactly then. By the end of month 5, I had it. The timing. The structure. The documentation. The leverage. Everything aligned around one event. A promotion. Not officially announced yet, but inevitable. Everything in his behavior pointed to it. Everything in the company's public signals supported it. And once I saw that clearly, the rest became simple. Not easy, but simple. The Sunday before that week, I did something I hadn't done before. I drove. Not to him, not to her, but near enough to understand the scale of what I was about to do. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. And I thought about consequences. Not just mine. Not just his. Everyone connected to the structure I was about to disrupt. Careers. Reputations. People who had nothing to do with what he chose. Because truth doesn't land neatly. It spreads. I sat with that. Fully. Honestly. Not to stop myself, but to make sure I understood the weight. Because once I moved forward, there would be no version of this where things stayed contained. I closed my eyes briefly, took a slow breath, then opened them again, and nodded to myself. The decision had already been made months ago. This was just the final confirmation. By Monday morning, everything was in place. The folder was complete, organized, cross-referenced, structured in a way that didn't rely on emotion. Only facts, only alignment, only proof that couldn't be turned into a conversation about my perspective. I saved copies, multiple locations. With my lawyer. One offline, one secured. Because once something matters, you don't leave it vulnerable. On Wednesday night, he kissed me goodnight and said, "Big day tomorrow." I smiled softly. I know. He looked at me for a second, searching, maybe for doubt, maybe for something he could read. He found nothing, because there was nothing left for him to read.
Mads.
I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, not thinking about him, not thinking about her, not even thinking about what I had built. Just still, calm in a way I hadn't been in months, because everything that needed to happen next was already set in motion. Thursday morning, I woke up before him. Not abruptly, not with nerves or hesitation, just awake, clear. The kind of clarity that only comes when a decision has already been made and accepted. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing beside me. Then I got up, moved through the apartment like I always did. Coffee, emails, a quick glance at the calendar. Routine. He came into the kitchen around 8:10, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, already dressed for something important. I didn't need to ask. It showed. The blazer. The watch he only wore when he wanted to be taken seriously. The contained energy under his skin. "Big day," I said lightly, handing him a cup. He smiled. "Yeah, not overly excited. Not obvious. Controlled. I might be a little late tonight," he added. "Depends how things go." "Of course." I nodded. "Good luck." He stepped closer and kissed my cheek. "Thanks." And then he left, just like any other day. I waited 10 minutes, long enough that the building settled back into silence. Then I picked up my bag, not the one I usually carried, a different one, structured, professional. Inside it, the folder, printed, tabbed, every section labeled, every page placed exactly where it needed to be. I checked it once more, not because I doubted anything, because I don't walk into something like that unprepared. Then I left. His office building was glass and steel, 14 floors, clean lines, neutral lobby, the kind of place where everything looks calm on the surface, even when it isn't. I walked in at 9:15, straight to the front desk. "Hi," I said evenly. "I need to speak with someone in HR. It's time sensitive." The receptionist hesitated just long enough to assess me. "Do you have a name?" "I do," I said. "Melissa Grant, head of HR." I had done my research. She made a call. I waited. 11 minutes. I counted. Because time matters when you're about to change something irreversible. Melissa Grant was composed. Mid-40s. Sharp eyes. The kind of woman who had handled difficult conversations before and knew how to sit still while someone else spoke. She led me into a conference room, closed the door, sat across from me. "Rachel," she said, glancing at the note from reception. "How can I help you?" I placed the folder on the table between us. Carefully. Deliberately. "I want to begin by saying that everything in this folder is documented," I said. Dated, cross-referenced, and backed up. She didn't reach for it yet. "Okay," she said. "I'm not here to negotiate anything," I continued. "And I'm not here to make demands. I'm here to provide accurate information about a situation that directly involves one of your employees." Her expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. "Go ahead." It took 30 minutes. 32, if you count the pauses. I walked her through everything. The dates, the discrepancies, the financial patterns tied to vendor accounts, the overlap with Emily's presence in connected projects, the timeline of communication, the counseling pattern that aligned with behavioral shifts. I spoke the way I speak in meetings. Clear, sequential, no emotion, no accusations, just structure. Because truth doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. When I finished, the room was quiet. Melissa looked at the folder, then at me, then back at the folder again. I appreciate you bringing this forward, she said finally. I nodded once. She leaned back slightly. What outcome are you expecting? I'm not expecting one, I said. What you do with this information is your decision. I'm simply making sure you have it. She studied me for a moment, then asked, Are you still in a relationship with Daniel? I held her gaze. I ended it 9 days ago, I said. He hasn't been informed yet. A small pause. Not surprise. Calculation. The timing of today was intentional, I added. She nodded slowly. I understand. Another beat of silence. Then she closed the folder. We'll handle this from here. I know you will, I said. I stood. She did too. At the door, I paused just slightly. There are patterns in there that extend beyond just him, I said. You'll see them. She didn't respond. But she didn't need to. I left the building at 9:52. Stepped out into daylight. Normal. Unremarkable. People walking past. Cars moving. No one looking at me twice. No one knowing what had just been set in motion. I walked to my car. Sat for a moment, hands resting in my lap. Then I started the engine. And drove away. At 2:41 that afternoon, my lawyer confirmed the paperwork had been delivered. Daniel was in a conference room when it happened. I know that because his assistant mentioned it when the process server checked in. Timing matters. Precision matters. At 3:10, he was called into another meeting. This one, not scheduled. Melissa. 2 senior partners. Closed door. Longer than expected. At 5:17, my phone rang. His name on the screen. I watched it. Didn't move. Didn't reach for it. Just let it ring. It stopped. Then started again. I let that one go too. The voicemail came through a few seconds later. I didn't listen to it immediately. I waited until evening. Sat on the edge of my bed. Pressed play. His voice was controlled. Of course it was. Rachel, I need to talk to you, he said. I don't know what's going on, but something's happening here and I think we should figure this out together. Together. A soft exhale. We can fix this, he added. There it was. The first crack. Not in his tone, in the space between his words. I listened until the end. Then I deleted it. I didn't feel relief. Not the way people expect. No surge of satisfaction. No dramatic release. Because the truth is, I had already grieved. 6 months earlier, standing in a kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, listening to a laugh that wasn't meant for me. That was when it ended. This was just the confirmation. The days that followed were quiet. Not externally. Externally, things moved. Processes, reviews, conversations happening in rooms I wasn't in. But internally, I felt clear, like something that had been out of alignment for a long time had finally settled into place. My brother asked me one evening how I was doing. I thought about it for a second, then said, I'm okay. He looked at me carefully. Honestly? I nodded. Honestly, I feel like I can breathe again. He didn't say anything after that, just nodded once, like he understood more than I had explained. I don't know exactly how everything unfolded for Daniel inside those walls. I don't need to. I know enough. The promotion didn't happen. The structure shifted, and whatever version of control he thought he had collapsed, quietly, completely. Some nights I still think about those 6 years. The good ones, the real ones, because they were real, and losing something real, even when it's necessary, still has weight, but it's a different kind of weight now. Not confusion, not doubt, just truth. The folder still exists. For now. Organized. Complete. Waiting for the final step. Because I don't close things halfway. I never have. 6 months. 1 folder. 32 minutes in a conference room. That's what it took. Not to destroy something, but to see it clearly. And once you see something clearly, you don't need to fight it. You just step out of it. That Thursday afternoon, while everything was unfolding behind glass doors and closed meetings, I was walking outside. In ordinary daylight. No one stopping me. No one calling my name. Just the quiet sound of my own footsteps. Moving forward.